Well, we got the briefs from the state of Illinois, the county of Cook, and the city of Chicago defending the state and local gun and magazine bans, saying that it's because of unprecedented societal concerns, but a plaintiff says that governments cannot balance rights with public interest. Good morning, back at it, Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. I talked with Richard Pearson, the executive director of the Illinois State Rifle Association, yesterday, and got his reaction to some of the top-line arguments that were filed by Illinois, Cook County, and the city of Chicago. Now, they say in their arguments that the banned weapons are banned because they pose extraordinary risk to law enforcement, are not commonly used for self-defense, and that weapons in common use for criminal purposes may be regulated, they say. When I talked with Richard Pearson, I laid out some of those arguments for him, and he responded what his take is on their arguments in front of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, where you have consolidated cases from the Southern District that got an injunction but was stayed, and the Northern District where judges sided with the state and local governments upholding gun bans. So the case now in front of the Seventh Circuit on an expedited docket, and it's going to be heard June 29th. Here's Richard Pearson responding to some of those arguments.
Well, that's the same arguments they used before. You know, the AR-15, for example, is the most commonly produced firearm and used firearm in the United States. There are no more common use firearms than the AR-15. Therefore, the common use thing goes out the window because they are the most common use, and statistics show that. I mean, there's a 24.5 million AR-15, and of the other types of firearms that hold 9 millimeters and other things like that, there's another 20 million of those or so, or 22 million. And so they are in common use. So it's also the best firearm there is for self-defense. So I don't see why they are saying that other than the fact that they don't want to listen to the argument.
Now, some argue that it's not the government's position to determine what weapon or firearm is used by an individual to protect themselves in self-defense. And the Second Amendment does not spell out self-defense as a reason why people have the right to keep and bear arms. The Second Amendment, 22 words, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's the security of a free state, which is somewhat of a broad term, but obviously, it could be a matter of things, like keeping yourself safe from a criminal who wants to do you and your family harm, or keeping yourself safe from a standing army that's conducting itself in a tyrannical manner, or keeping the country safe, a free state, from a foreign invasion. So the Second Amendment is pretty clear. And again, it's not a right that's bestowed upon you by the government. The amendments to the Constitution and the Constitution itself is a dictate to government what they can't do. And the Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But back to some of these arguments that the state was making and that the local governments were making in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. They say that it imposes extraordinary risk to law enforcement having these semi-automatic weapons. They say it's not commonly used for self-defense, AR-15s, for example, and that weapons in common use for criminal purposes may be regulated. Pearson responds to that aspect.
No, because that way there would be no constitutional rights of any kind.
And he talks about how, indeed, the use of weapons by criminals are not AR-15s.
That isn't true. They're only used in 1 or 2% of the crimes, like 1.4% of crimes use an AR-15 or something like that. So that is not true either. So this is a propaganda piece. This isn't really a reply brief. So that's what this is.
So Pearson also responding to other arguments that the state and local governments made in the Seventh Circuit Monday in their filings. And the government argued that the law and ordinances are justified because of unprecedented societal concerns and dramatic technological changes, they say, make the banned firearms dangerous and unusual. And I asked Pearson if, the societal concerns can outweigh or trump constitutional rights.
No, because that way there would be no constitutional rights of any kind. Any government could take anybody's constitutional rights if that were the case. The other thing is that in Bruin, they said there is no balance. It's either constitutional or it's not. And so the balance argument goes out the window also.
So Richard Pearson, executive director of the Illinois State Rifle Association, he is, a plaintiff in one of 4 cases from the Southern District that were consolidated where they got an injunction on the law from being enforced. But the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals issued a stay, essentially reversing that injunction and allowing for the law to continue to be implemented in the state of Illinois. So what's next here? Of course, you've got briefs that the plaintiffs are going to file. You've got the replies that are going to be filed later on this month. And then June 29th is when they're going to go and hear this case in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals up in Chicago. Richard Pearson says his team and others, plaintiffs groups, they're working on getting their briefs together with the focus of that June 29th hearing.
Yes, and then there's another 4 or 5 days or something for reply briefs and all that business. But so we're preparing for the 29th of June. So that's what we're preparing for. The other thing it says is that Bruin did not abrogate Freeman and Wilson, and the answer to that is that it totally did abrogate Freeman and Wilson, which are a couple earlier cases before the last Bruin decision. And so the Bruin decision actually changed those cases also.
And the Bruin decision seeming to impact cases all across the country. And a story that popped yesterday is, here's a headline from Reuters: U.S. cannot disarm people convicted of nonviolent crimes. According to an appeals court, the U.S. government cannot ban people convicted of nonviolent crimes from possessing guns, according to that federal appeals court Tuesday. This was from the 3rd U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, a Philadelphia-based court, and they said that comes from a 2020 lawsuit by a Pennsylvania man, Brian Range, who was barred using federal law from possessing a gun after pleading guilty to welfare fraud back in 1995. He claims the law violates his rights to bear arms under the Second Amendment of the Constitution. The courts last year, the Supreme Court ruled that the Second Amendment, any restrictions on gun possessions must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of gun regulation. A majority of the Third Circuit sided with Range and found that disarming nonviolent felons did not meet that standard. So obviously the Bruin decision having wide-ranging impacts on a whole host of cases, and it seems to be an indication of what could happen come out of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. You could have, after this hearing, June 29th here in Illinois, challenging Illinois' gun and magazine ban. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals could deem that the measure is unconstitutional, and then it would be reversed and not able to be implemented. And you would expect that that would go straight to the U.S. Supreme Court. When they could take that up, who knows? But we'll be watching this very closely in the weeks ahead as we get more briefs filed in this case, and as well as some of the other factors that play into this from across the country, with different cases popping up here and there. So a lot of movement this week in the gun litigation, not just in Illinois, but elsewhere. We'll do what we can to keep you posted on all of that here on WMAY and Bishop on Air. I'm Greg Bishop. You can always find me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. So pick your flavor and search Bishop on Air, and we can connect that.